So we are back, Joe, and we've got some more data. Last week we were looking at the first set of data. This week we're going to be looking at the different generations and sort of whether there's a difference in, whether your age matters about whether you're more likely to leave the business or not. And we pulled out quite an interesting trend. So basically, the younger the generation, the higher the flight risk. So basically, the younger you are, the more likely you are at any point really to leave the business.
Yes, that doesn't surprise me at all. Surely this is nothing new to anybody. But what is new is the fact that we now have the data to back it up, whereas we didn't before, right? We just thought that that was the case. But it's nice to have the data to back it up. And I think when we were chatting about it before, you said the number of times that I've said about how younger people vote with their feet in terms of their jobs and their careers. And in an industry like hospitality, which by its very nature is quite transient, and you can literally walk out of one place and walk into another place and get a new job. It's not at the level we're talking. It's not about doing 6 different assessments and psychometrics and, aren't I going to get this role? My first job in hospitality was, well, actually my first was behind a bar in Greece, but my second job in hospitality, I literally just walked in off the street and said, give me a job. I was looking for a proper job, if you like. I stayed, but most people wouldn't. I happen to have really great people who recognized that there was something in me and developed me because of that. So I was super, super lucky. But, I am now at the age where my friends' children are starting to do entry-level positions and starting to work sort of weekends or, as students. And a lot of them are working in hospitality, and it always fascinates me to hear their stories. And I might have alluded to this before on the podcast, but one of my friends, his son was working in a really high-end bar in Manchester, and my friend rang him up and said, oh, how's it going? Been there 2 or 3 weeks. And he went, oh yeah, no, I left. My mate was like, what do you mean you left? It was a job. It was a really great company. He went, yeah, well, no one talked to me. No one asked me how I was doing. So I just didn't go back the next day. And this boy is pursuing a career in hospitality as a mixologist. He's taking it very, very seriously. And that business lost out on somebody just because they didn't have a conversation with him, and that's one person, one random example. What are the chances? So it's happening, isn't it? Everywhere, all the time, that if you aren't talking to people really early and understanding about them, what their motivations are, what makes them get out of bed in the morning, communicating with them, then they will just go. That's just a fact.
And this does, just to be clear as well to the listener, this doesn't necessarily mean that the younger people are newer in the business.
No.
Although that probably is the case, because most of the time people are hiring younger people. It just means that younger people are more likely to leave. So I'll put a graph up on the screen, but basically it's a really consistent trend. We've got boomers, who are the oldest generation that we looked at 1.2, Gen X at 1.5, millennials at 1.75, and Gen Z at 1.84. So this is basically a measurement between 0 and 3, with 3 being the biggest risk to leave, basically. So Gen Z are almost 2 out of 3, sort of like 66% likely, let's say, to leave at any given point, whereas sort of the boomers are sort of like, 35% likely, something like that. So it's quite a big difference.
Do you think as well there might be something in it about how honest people are? Because if we think about sort of boomers and Gen X's, sharing our whole lives doesn't necessarily come naturally to us. God, anyone who vaguely knows me knows that I am all over LinkedIn every day, really boring, but it still makes me feel a little bit sick and anxious and horrible about it. And, I think that's because I haven't grown up in a world where we share everything that's happening to us and we assume that everybody wants to hear about what we've got to say. So I think there is something in it as well, that Gen Z and millennials are much more likely to actually say if they're not happy. Whereas I think boomers and Gen X, we're much more likely to be like, no, everything's fine. And then just go. And again, I'm massively generalizing here, but it just occurred to me that there might be something in that as well.
Certainly could be. Yeah, I'm just pulling up our previous conversations because when we looked at EMPS was lower, I think, with team members.
Yeah.
And you would probably say that Gen Z was probably going to be of the team member level.
Yeah.
So what was the other thing? We did something else as well, didn't we? We did something else that indicated how Gen Z were willing to basically share their feelings more.
Yeah.
And which is what you were talking about, We've said it a couple of times, really, how sort of the boomers and the older generation, they just get on with it.
Yeah. I think there's just getting on with it. It's, keep calm and carry on, and that sort of mentality, isn't it?
Yeah.
And we grew up tolerating more in the workplace. It's like, if I didn't cry at least once a week, I swear the people that trained me thought they weren't doing a good job. Whereas now, if you meet someone cry at work, you probably, I mean, all hell would break loose, right? It's a different world, and we need to appreciate that, and we need to manage people accordingly. If you have people that are baby boomers or Generation X who work for you and you're having these conversations, don't expect them to be as quite as open as millennials and Gen Z who assume that you want to know what they're thinking all the time, and need that continuous feedback. So again, it's very much around understanding the individual as well as it is understanding sort of their generation, the generation that they come from. But it all goes back to having conversations with people and having coaching conversations with people and making them feel trusted. I think you said in our last podcast, you said about making this type of conversation a safe space to be. If you say, oh, actually, this might not be a place I'm going to work forever, well, you don't want a manager to then ignore you for the next 6 months or whatever, just because you haven't pleased your undying allegiance to their business. Back in my day, if I'd have said that to my manager, oh yeah, I'm probably only going to stay a year, get out. If you're not loyal and you're not gonna, if you're not in it, you're not on the bus, then off you go. That's fair enough, but you do have to understand that people want different stuff, and you have to find out what that is and what makes them tick and what's going to make them stay.
So what would the action point be here then? What could people do differently? I think in the back of their heads, people probably already knew this. Maybe younger people were more likely to be at risk of leaving, but now we've confirmed it with data. Mm-hmm. Would you have the aspirations conversation with younger people more frequently, or what would you do anything differently?
I wouldn't necessarily say more frequently, but I mean, have it in the first place, because a lot of businesses don't have this kind of conversation. So I said, make sure you're having this conversation, make sure you're having it at least every 3 months. Make the time to do it, I suppose would be what I would say. And I suppose for sort of the older generations, it's a case of, I suppose, spending a bit more time to tease the answers out and to, ask coaching style questions, to really understand, what it is that they're looking for. And yeah, I think certainly with the Gen Zs, it's that the first, I can't say it enough, that first 100 days is just so crucial, like it's so important. And people they don't have a sense of loyalty to you in the first 3 months. They're still finding their feet. They're still understanding whether they're a fit for what you say, what you've sold them in the recruitment process. So I think, yeah, in the first 3 months, check in really regularly. Not necessarily asking the questions that we've, the questions that we talked about in terms of what's next for you, but certainly asking the well-being question. If you're having any challenges, how happy are you? Would you recommend us as a great place to work? They're all indicators of risk.
Yeah, 100%. Perfect. Okay, awesome. Well, we'll leave that one there. I think we'll explore that one a bit more in depth later and see how that maybe interlinks with some of the other ones that we've looked at. So, see you next week.
See you then.
Awesome.